I next became involved with this area in the 1950s when I was a teenager, and all of this area had sheds. There were sheds. There was a shed in the space there, that was Batotto's shed, the Italian fisherman. There was another shed or two beside them on the site where the Port Phillip Yacht Club had been until its big fire in the 1930s. This was the boat hire, and Billy Earwicker ran this. Billy Earwicker was a very strident, loud man, and he ran a very tight ship. This was the Definas shed, and the Definas were Italian fishermen, and I was friendly with their sons. And next to this were two sheds, both used by the Victorian Ladies Yacht Club. The Victorian Ladies Yacht Club was a medium for ladies to sail, because neither Royal Brighton Yacht Club nor Sandringham Yacht Club allowed women members. They didn't allow women into their bars. Eventually they did. They had a little corner in the bar for women, but if you were caught at Royal Brighton with a girl aboard your boat in a race, you were automatically disqualified. And the women were pretty naughty about that, and so they started their own Victorian Ladies Yacht Club, and as far as I know, it was the only all-female yacht club in Victoria, if not Australia, and possibly even the world. They were very keen yachts people, nearly said yachtsmen, very keen yachtswomen, and all of their boats were dinghies, and they kept them in the two sheds. Carl Defina and I both had surfboards which were nearly 18 feet long, and we kept them in this shed. It was a typical fisherman's shed. It had nets, long lines, bait, buoys, great collection of old oars from all sorts of vessels, bits of lights, and everything you can imagine in a real fisherman's shed. They had three quite large boats out here, and they fished for snapper on long lines, they netted, and they also fished for shark. We would come down and we stored our surfboards in racks in the roof, and we would slide them out, walk across here, across the car park, and launch them immediately beyond the gap in the seawall that you can see there. And we would carry them across here. Very few cars in those days. It'd be just fishermen sitting around and whole lots of old anchors and bits of chain. And this was the opening, and down in here there was a wooden ramp which ran out to about where the dog sign is into the water, and people launched dinghies. Billy Earwicker launched boats here all the time. We would slide our surfboards into the water here, climb aboard, and we would paddle straight out there under the pier. The jetty started right here where the stone wall was. This was quite a high stone wall, and the water level was where it is now, so you can imagine it was fairly low. And it was shallow enough to walk around, but at high tide we could paddle straight out there. There was no marina or anything in front of the yacht club. There was the submarine out there as a breakwater, and we'd paddle beside that. And even when the stone wall was built, that started in the late 40s and early 50s, we would just paddle around the stone wall and go down to Black Rock or round to Sandringham, wherever the best looking girls were at the time, to take them for rides on our surfboards. There's a photo in my book of a big shark pulled up on a ramp here, and that's this ramp that we're standing on, and it's probably a metre or so below us under all of this sand. As this area started to silt up, sand began to form here, and a little bit of a beach started. Billy Earwicker had a pole at the top of the building, and there was another big pole like a lamppost over on the jetty, and a heavy cable ran from it, and he ran a flying fox so that if it was too shallow here, you could bring a boat into the lower level of the jetty. The jetty had side piers on it. You could bring a boat in, you would haul it onto the flying fox and run it on wheels on the cable right through into the shed up there. And I didn't become involved again here until the 70s when I bought my boat, which was on a swing mooring in the harbour. The area here had started to silt up, and it was just sand, and gradually the sand built up to about where the curve in the road is, and there was quite a big sloping beach. Hank and Unc had a winch here, and they used to draw boats up on the beach, And this whole area was just sand. There were no bushes or anything, of course. The jetty had started to become unusable in this part because of the sand build-up, and this whole area was littered with old fishing boats in various stages of decomposition or restructuring. There were always boats being rebuilt or painted or whatever. A whole lot of stuff lying around, old anchors and chain and dinghies, and it was really quite a picturesque sort of shipyard. Gradually, as the sand extended and seeds came in, plants started to germinate on this area, and the result now, of course, is what you can see, with lots of bushy area. The pier is still under there, and if you dug into there, you'd find the timber crossboards and all the piles would be still in place. They were never removed, just covered over with sand. The story of this whole area over time has been one of sand build-up due to the literal drift of sand coming from the north to the south, so that this area quite often became difficult for boat owners because of all the shallows. But then when the literal drift reversed and the big northerlies came in, the northwesterlies came in and scoured this area, then there was problems with all the sand disappearing, and even the seawall had to be put there because there were washaways in front of the shed, and all of those sheds were under threat. The original Sandringham Yacht Club had been built over there, and it was removed and rebuilt where it is now because the same thing happened. The literal drift built up the sand in front of it, and it became difficult to launch boats, and then for the other 6 months of the year the storms would come in and strip the sand away, and the building was under threat. Water would get in under the building and boats would be endangered and so on. So this whole area had a history over the 100 years that I've been able to read about of the sand coming and going. But once the stone breakwater was completed, and the opening in it, there was an opening with a big timber bridge, that had to be closed because it rendered the breakwater ineffective. Once that was all closed, of course, the sand continued to bottle up here. There was no way for the northwesterlies to get in and scour it out. So we have the result with an ever-increasing beach, which has gone on to what we see today. Well, I think both the council and the state government really had policies, particularly in the 50s, of getting rid of every structure on the beach that they could get rid of. The fact was that was still used as a viable business, hiring boats. And so many people came down here, particularly of weekend, and hired boats. And bear in mind that was something that people could do who didn't have a lot of cash. You could hire a rowing boat. They didn't all have motors. People mainly hired rowing boats, and they rowed out to catch their fish. It was only later that I can remember them getting some with motors in them, and slowly, one by one, motors were fitted to all of them. But there would be rows of boats here alongside the pier, ready to go, and it was a great outlet for people who just could not afford a boat. And maybe with the situation we're getting now, where we're building more and more marinas and more provision for boats, and getting so congested that maybe the wheel will turn, and somewhere we'll see big hire areas again for boats. But that's how I believe this survived. That's how Defina's shed survived, because they used it as fishermen. And so the kayak shop was Batotto's shed, and Big Scott had that, and he was a professional fisherman too. So anything that was being used survived, but most of the buildings on the foreshore had fell into comparative disuse. One of our favourite playgrounds. The pier was pretty much as you see today. The timbers were older, and the fence along here was in timber. But there were lower landings. There was a lower landing in that corner there, and there was another lower landing just about where the sand starts. And they were good places where you could dive in. The water was quite deep, and boats came into those, and the fishermen unloaded their catches onto those lower landings and went up the steps. So this was a very favourite sort of playground area, and there was just no sand. There was water right over to the seawall in front of the shed, and this whole area was filled with boats that were on swing moorings, as there are boats out there now today, but see, they can only go out in that deeper water. But this whole area was small boats on swing moorings. We lived and played and had fun on the jetty, and there were always fishermen working here. This wooden fence always had nets drying in the sun, and there'd usually be somebody sitting on a fishing basket sewing away, repairing holes in the fishing nets. It was quite a busy little fishing port, because Hampton and Sandringham were essentially fishing villages, as were Black Rock. None of this was here. The original site of the Sandringham Yacht Club was over there between the Scouts and Guides headquarters and the Anglers Club. It was there on the sand, a timber building, and it had to be removed because the sand was continually washing away right over where those buildings are at the foot of the cliff, and so the building was taken. It was actually cut into sections, rolled into the water, floated around the pier and re-erected over there on the site of the club building where it is today. There was nothing here where the Ladies Yacht Club was. That was the site of the slipway, and boats went up on slips into the yacht club yard, right away back near the yacht club's entrance today. None of this sand was here at all, none of this vegetation, nothing at all. The cliffs were all open. There were 2 rows of bathing boxes right around there, one behind the other, and the boat sheds started around about here and went right back to where we were talking, near Sailboard headquarters. The whole area was very busy and was very popular with holiday makers, and of course it was so crowded on hot afternoons, and people came from the city on the train for a big day outing to a holiday destination, which was Hampton Beach and Sandringham Jetty. The photo that you have shows boats coming in quite deep water to the lower landing that I was talking about, and that was used during my childhood quite a lot. And the pole that you can see in front of there was the stay pole for the cable that ran right across to the shed, and that's where they used to run boats on a flying fox across when the water was too shallow. But at high tide there was no need to use that at all. It wasn't used a lot because there was enough water to take boats in and drag them up that little landing that I was talking about. Most boats were returned to the water and tied fore and aft against the jetty in the close-in part of the pier, and Billy Earwicker would wade out in his waders and take charge of the boat and tie it up and go back and collect the money. So it was busy and bustling. There was no yacht club yard, none of this was here at all, and as the marina was slowly built, we would paddle our boards, and then we started sailing, and we sailed out of the club and didn't come under the jetty as much as we used to.